Well, what's going on, everybody? We are back. This is Myron Pierce. I got my amiga in the passenger side. No, I'm actually in the passenger side. I'm riding shotgun today with Jade. You guys are in for a treat. If this is your first time, we want to say welcome to the Church Next show. We're dedicated to 100x impact. That's what we're on for the next till Jesus returns. And here's what we believe: healthy church growth and healthy reproduction. And that's what we're all about. So I have a good friend of mine. We go way back like hubcaps and Cadillacs. His name is Josh Dotzler, amazing leader doing amazing things. I've had the privilege to lock arms with Josh here in our city, and his impact is amazing. And so, Josh, what's happening, bro? It's good to have you, man. How you doing?
Good, brother. Man, it's so good to be here. Jade, good to be with you. And man, I'm excited to be a part of the podcast.
Yeah, man. So tell us a little bit, man. Walk us on this journey where today we're talking about, innovating through crisis. And you've done a great job at helping to narrate a better or a different aspect when it comes to navigating crisis and the things that God's used you to do and your team and right here in Omaha to help us become even more compassionate, man. So number one, bro, like, tell us about your journey. Who are you? Where are you from? What are you leading? And in your social security number.
I'm like, man, you want all the information today. This is a setup for something else. This might be a setup. No, man, like I said, so good to be here and be with you guys. And, born and raised right here in Omaha, Nebraska. And, my parents, my dad, I got to tell people, my dad's a white guy from a rural town in Iowa. My mom's African-American from Washington, D.C. They met playing college basketball, got married. And my dad, after being a chemical engineer, felt like God was calling him to the mission field. So he quit his job, sold his house, and they end up moving in to the inner city context. And my dad, being a white guy moving into this community, said within the first 2 weeks, he saw more police, more crime and violence in 2 weeks than he had ever seen in his entire life. And so I was 2 when my parents moved in to that community, grew up in that context. And, there's a saying in communities like this, like ours: work hard, get an education, and you too can move out of the ghetto. And that was the saying for my life. And I thought basketball was my ticket out. I wanted to be a baller. Who doesn't want to be a baller? Who doesn't want to have big dreams?
Yeah.
And so I got the opportunity. I was pretty successful in high school. Got to play college basketball. Tore my PCL as a freshman. Played for Creighton University. Shout out to any Blue Jays out there. There's probably nobody out there, but we should be playing in the Sweet 16, but we got beat.
Yeah, man.
That's for another day. Yeah. But went to college to play basketball and really thought that was my ticket out of this community and really my ticket onto another life that didn't involve ministry. And got hurt my freshman year, tore my PCL, and God really used that to redirect my life. And I'll never forget being in my dorm room and I felt like God reminded me of the scripture verse, Revelations 3:16, either you're hot, you're cold. If you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth.
Wow.
I felt like God said, Josh, either serve me 110% or don't serve me at all. And so that was kind of my journey into responding to God and saying, all right, God, my wife and I said, wherever you want to send us, that's where we'll go. And opened up this door for us to move back into the community that we came from. And I think part of, like, when we think of crisis and innovation, when you grow up in a community full of crime and violence and chaos and poverty, you're in the middle of crisis all the time. And you learn to survive, you learn to try to create, you learn to try to make things happen. And then I think the other thing is sports.
Right.
I was a point guard, not very tall, 6 feet. And my strength was really creating opportunities for those on my team and trying to set people up for success. And I feel like those gifts that God gave me and my experiences and coming back and joining my parents' ministry, nonprofit, and then the church that we would start really has given me, I would just say, a unique ability to try to be a part of the solution, when crisis hits. And so I would say a lot of my experiences have been birthed from that. And, some things you just can't do on your own. You find yourself in a situation of crisis and you realize, man, God had been preparing me for that moment in time. And I think a lot of it came to head in 2020 with the COVID crisis. And then a lot of the racial tension that happened in our city and trying to be a part of the solution with that too.
Josh, you bring something up. When you grow up in communities of color or under-resourced, we all know that we're born into crisis.
Yep.
Right. And so we're actually raised to be crisis management.
Yep.
Right. To manage crisis. And speaking of crisis, we all know the three-headed monster, I would call it, the mark of the pre-mark of the beast was COVID and politics and race. Right. And we've heard it said, like, in crisis, there's always opportunity. But if you've never had to manage crisis at that level, it's kind of hard to steward it. So when things like COVID, race, and all these things happen, it wasn't like the people in our community. We've already had to manage crisis for years, right? And so this has, I think, put a lot of leaders who are in communities like ours, like Jade's and PE's and Urban Edge Church, puts us in a position to add value. And so as a leader, I've personally watched you. We've played basketball together, and you've beat the snot out of me, and I would have called that injustice. But you have a unique perspective, and so how has the three-headed monster shaped you as a leader, and what are you learning that can really help us as the church in crisis management?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point earlier, I said one of the unique things that happened when COVID hit is it was the first time our entire city was in crisis. Historically, it was our community that was in crisis, but the city was in crisis. And what happens in crisis, I wrote this book, Church in Crisis.
Right.
And the word crisis has two, in Japanese, has two meanings: danger and opportunity. Mm-hmm. And crisis creates a level of clarity because it takes off the mask and it really gives us a picture and a window into what's really inside of us. And so when COVID hit, our entire city was in crisis and people were responding in different ways. And I feel like for us, we were already positioned because we were doing the work to try to respond in the crisis. I'd say this: number one, our passion is to see the church be in the middle of the crisis. We really believe that the potential in the church is greater than the problems in our city and in our community. And so when crisis hit, we were already leading from and thinking from that mindset.
Okay, let me stop you there, because you just said something so powerful, and the topic of this conversation is about innovating through crisis. You said you were already in a position, and that's an innovative principle, because if we wait, so for example, the Edge Church, the Edge Church has been one of the early pioneers of the hip hop church movement. And the crisis in that movement is overwhelming, but to see a church for years innovating around preparing for what we don't even know is coming.
Right.
And so I just want our audience to get that crisis is coming. And so our job as leaders is to prepare for it. Unpack that for me, because I know you've talked about that in your book, but unpack, like, how do you prepare for crisis and then learn in that to innovate?
Well, yeah, I think number one, crisis is the great revealer. It shows us what we've been preparing for. And the opportunity in crisis, number one, it reveals what we've already been preparing for. But then number two, after we see where we've been, we can adjust accordingly. So for us, again, our starting point was, we believe the church is called to be in the center of places in our city that are experiencing the most challenging realities. And so our starting point is we've put all our time, energy, effort, and work into trying to come up with solutions. Our neighborhood solution is a solution that focuses on decreasing crime and violence. And our campus focuses on providing holistic opportunities for people in our community who otherwise wouldn't have those opportunities. It focuses on raising up leaders and bringing resources to the inner city context. And so like everything we do is revolving around trying to be the solution where there is great challenge. And I think for many churches, I mean, just a few things that I think were really highlighted to me that maybe pointed to what our churches have been known for is during the COVID crisis, the doors of almost every church were closed.
Right.
The only doors that were open were people who were doing activities that were essential for our communities.
Interesting.
So if the doors that were open were organizations that were essential to the communities, why were most of our church doors closed?
Wow.
And again, I think it was a revelation and a revealer that, man, maybe what we're doing with church is focused on a group of people, not all bad, but maybe we're not meeting the needs of the community like we thought we were. Maybe we're not as essential to our communities and to our neighborhoods as we hoped we would be.
That's a great, you better jump in, Jade. Ride the wave, girl. Ride the wave.
No, yeah, that is a great point because, you know, our pastor always says, like, if the church wasn't there, would our community miss us?
Right.
And I think that the idea of the churches being closed speaks more into the point of the importance of us being the church and realizing, like, how do you have church beyond the four walls? You know, how do you use social media? How do you use just being, you know, boots on the ground and actually being the church in the world? So you really do bring up a good point. So when we're talking about the, you know, the three-headed monster that was talking about COVID, race and politics, it seems now like in 2022, it may seem like those things have quietened down a little bit. There's, you know, people aren't in masks. COVID's not such a big thing. You don't hear the political arguments as you did every day 2 years ago. But is there still a crisis? Are we still in a crisis mode right now? And if we are, what are some of those crises, and what should we as leaders in this time be thinking about when it comes to innovation?
Oh, great question. Great question. I mean, I would say 100% we're in crisis mode. And I think for a variety of reasons, and, you know, let's bring up the race conversation. And what happened when, you know, George Floyd happened, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list of names of individuals who lost their lives and whose video showed, what I said was those videos gave us visuals to voices that have been crying out for generations.
Wow.
Amen.
And the truth is, for many of us, those videos didn't tell us something we didn't already know. Right. But they revealed something to the broader community and the broader world. And so I think the truth is, man, in the community I serve and I live in, and where you guys live and you serve, there's crisis every day. I'm working with a mom who's 23 years old, who in the last 8 months, her mom passed away. She was raped. She gave birth to twins. One twin just passed away. She's in an environment, in a home where, I mean, there is no hope for the future of her son unless somebody intervenes. Those are the types of crisis that we see on a daily basis. The inequities of leaders in our community who don't have the resources to be successful. And so I think that the challenge is, you know, when it comes to coverage and media and awareness, one of the things that I heard over and over during COVID, even the race stuff, was this idea of compassion fatigue. I don't know if you guys ever heard that, but a lot of leaders were talking about this idea of compassion fatigue. And again, I come from a sports background. You do preseason training, you do running, you condition yourself for the game. And so everything you're doing is conditioning yourself to prepare. So when you're in the crunch time of the game, you're ready. And for me, when I look at scripture and I look at the life of Jesus, I never see this idea of compassion fatigue. He never got tired of expressing compassion and ultimately taking action. And so sometimes I just wonder, are we training people in the right ways? I've never heard a pastor talk about tithing fatigue. I've never heard a leader talk about attendance fatigue. Man, you guys are showing up too much. Like, you got to stop showing up. But this idea of compassion fatigue, and I think it's a cultural reality in our churches that we get tired of hearing these stories and these narratives. I mean, I've seen studies that say the church is less likely today to get involved in social and racial injustice because they're tired of hearing about it. Well, I know this, when you live like you guys do in communities like we're in, you can't get tired because you're seeing it, you're experiencing it. And so I think that's where part of it, it's up to us to continue to raise our voice, to continue to share stories. And I think it's up to the church as a whole to recognize, man, we have crisis all over our city. And part of God's heart and our work as leaders is to see where it's at so we can mobilize our people towards it.
Amen. So you did speak briefly about a situation that you're dealing with at the moment with that 23-year-old mom, and prayers going out for her as well. Can you give any other examples or stories of how God is using you, your ministry, and your church to really be the church in this moment of crisis? Like, what are some tangible examples of that?
Yeah. One of the things that we realized during COVID was just the challenge people were having with receiving food and just meeting some of those practical needs. And so during COVID, we started doing food distribution. We've got a campus here. It's about a 24-acre campus. It used to be the Nebraska School for the Deaf. And so every second Saturday during COVID, it was once a week. We set up a whole food distribution line where we're giving out hot meals, groceries, frozen food. I think we did like 10,000 diapers the other day. But the coolest part about it is, as people are driving through, somebody stopped me the other day. We doing the jerk as we're passing out food, and that's a dance move and just having fun. We got music playing. But she was like, man, I've been to other food distribution places, but I like to come here because you guys are giving out hope. You guys have joy about you. And ultimately for us, we've seen people over the last 2 years drive through the food line and ultimately end up in the baptism tank. And so for us, everything that we're doing, we want our food line to lead to baptism and to real life change. And so there's that side of things that we would call kind of our relief work. We over the last 10, 11 years, we buy old abandoned houses, we fix them up, we mobilize volunteers from churches from around our city, and put families in those homes that we eventually call lighthouses, where they become advocates in those neighborhoods. And then we resource them with resources we have on campus, whether it's the fitness center, whether it's a dance studio and dance classes and programs, mentorship. So we really believe holistically. And with our church, I would say one of the things that I've recognized is sometimes, I think every church has a heart and desire to make a difference in their community, but a lot of times our rhythms compete with our values.
Right, man.
And so, like what I've seen is our value is to serve our community. Our value is to be in the middle of the crisis. But we're so busy gathering and we got service every Sunday and Bible study and all these gathering moments. And then we say, hey, if you have time, this is how you can serve your community. So we've tried to structurally, we have a nonprofit designated and a church. We've tried to, in terms of our rhythm, say, hey, we're only going to meet twice a week on Sundays, and then we're going to serve every second Saturday, and we're going to be in the community. So we've tried to create unique rhythms that I would say came out of COVID. Because in COVID, we saw that we can do almost everything we're doing on a Sunday through, digital presence. Now, we also saw that there's nothing like being together. And so we still need to gather. We still need to celebrate. But there are things that we can do via media and do online. And so for me, it allowed us to step back and say, wow, we can do things different. We don't have to do the same old things and expect different results.
Wow.
And I'll say this, we're not afraid to try things.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you highlighted such a good point that despite how innovative we become, you know, basic human needs will always be basic human needs. We can talk about how well we're doing with media and how shiny, you know, our services are and stuff like that. But ultimately, people are always going to need food. They're always going to need shelter, water, education, and the love of Christ. And I think that's ultimately what it shows by doing those things. I just think that was a really good point, that even as we speak about innovation, don't be so lost in, you know, futuristic that you forget the everyday needs of your neighbors.
So good. I mean, we through some of the refugee crisis, we have some people staying in our dormitories here on campus. And so we've created some space. One of the sayings that we've said over the years, Myron's heard this, and Myron might even come up with this, but when the spiritual becomes practical, it's powerful.
Yeah.
And I think so often we do live in this mindset of, we get overly spiritual. And even when we think of innovation is being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Man, hold up. Wait. Please, Jay and Josh, please. Because we had Tommy Colonin on here a couple of weeks ago, and he said something that you're hitting on, that we need to build on this definition of innovation, because we're saying how to innovate through crisis. We need to start with a definition that's healthy enough to help us grow as church leaders. Tommy said innovate. No, it wasn't Tommy. It was Greg Atkinson. He said innovation is listening to the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
And let's add the second part to that. That innovation is being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yep.
And that, like, we're not an innovative church if I'm not. I heard my friend Jay Wood say it like this. He said we have to have an ear to the Spirit, an ear to the culture, and then look in our hands to see how we can meet the needs of both.
Yep.
Amen. And it goes into that scripture. It talks about, don't be so heavenly minded that you have no earthly good. Like sometimes we can stay up here in the clouds and not be doing anything with our hands and feet. So thank you again for making that point.
And I would say this too, guys. I think so. Our we would say our purpose is to mobilize influence, which is mobilize the church to revitalize the inner city. And I think regardless of your role as a leader in your church, you're always trying to mobilize your people, and you're always trying to impact your community. And I think there's two questions every person is asking that ultimately innovation helps us answer these questions. Number one, there's one group of people in our community that are asking, can you help me? And so when we think about innovation, when we think about serving, we're thinking about how can we find more ways to help people in our community? It's a powerful question that people all around us are asking. How can you help me? The next question is powerful too. And it's, how can I help? And I think especially in the suburban context, people who aren't at our churches are actually asking the question, how can I help? How can I help people in our city who are in need? And so one of the innovative ways, as we're working with pastors and church leaders, I tell them, you know, if you're going to collect, let's say Easter's coming up and you're collecting candy for your Easter egg drop. I said, don't just invite your congregation to collect candy. Invite your congregation to invite 10 of their neighbors to help you collect candy for the Easter egg hunt that's going to serve your community and gives them a reason to get connected to what you're doing.
So Josh, one of the things, as long as I've been knowing you, we've grew up under the leadership of your dad, phenomenal leader, Ron Dotzler. And we always talked about the principle of seeking the peace and prosperity of the city, because if it prospers, so will you. And what I hear you saying is if there's a traditional event like an egg drop, out of crisis, we've learned how not only the principle is not only how we mobilize our church, but how do we mobilize their neighbors? Because what you're saying there is, just because we're Christians don't mean that we get to be the chief candy officer provider. Like there's nothing spiritual about that. But the innovation, because what I've learned and seen, and you know this, all of us know this, is the foundation of disciple making becomes ingrained into our people as we help them see that outside of their home is a group of people, their neighbors, man, that we can mobilize.
Yes. Who are asking, how can I help? I mean, I think one of the things we saw in COVID is that those who aren't connected to church, the non-believer, they were responding in ways to meet the needs of the community. I would even say this, in some circles I was in, the non-believer was responding better than the believer. And one of the things I wrote in my book, which maybe I should take out, but I said, what I saw was celebrities were using their influence to raise money and awareness for causes, while Christians were using celebrities to grow their congregations.
Wow.
And it was just such a picture of, man, how are we leveraging?
Gosh, how can you even go to the next point without explaining? Like, I need you to unpack that. I need you to unpack that some more.
Well, again, I think when COVID hit, what I saw was these celebrities throwing concerts and using social media and using their platform to raise money, to raise awareness, to feed people. I found myself in circles of Christians, leaders in our city, where we were asking all these questions, and ultimately we never took any action. And then I saw, Christians who during the COVID seasons loved, having conversations with celebrities on social media and Instagram Live and all these different things, but they were doing nothing for the community. It was all about growing their followership. It was all about growing what they were doing. And I think that's one of the things that COVID highlighted, was that the people in our city want to make a difference. They want to get in the game. Number one, the church should be leading the way, and shame on us if we're not. But number two, we should be inviting them in to help us make a difference because they want to and they're ready.
That brings us to this question I want to ask you, Josh. One of the things I've learned is how different we are. Even working with Jade on this show, how different we are. She is very structured. She wants to know where we're going, if we're going to have lunch on the way, who's not showing up, and if not, why, right? And one of the ways we're different, I'll pump out a book in like 30 days, right? It takes you 300 years to write a book. But our processes are different. So it's been cool to see your process, because I know you were first working on another book, right? And going through that. But like, I feel like this book that you dropped in COVID has been a game changer for a lot of leaders, a lot of churches. So walk us through the journey, man. Why'd you write the book, and what are you hoping that leaders, Christians will get from what you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, I think our messages come out of our purpose. And so the original book I had written and have done devotionals on is really around this idea of being a game changer. And my podcast, it's using your God-given influence to impact the world around you. And our heart is to really mobilize the church, to see the church in the center of the crisis, the church changing the world. And so this book, Church in Crisis, honestly was not on my radar. It wasn't anything I was thinking about, but it was as the crisis was unfolding. Wow. And as we were in the center of a lot of conversations, I feel like it was a combination of 30 plus years of my dad's ministry, the 10 plus years that I had been a part and involved. And it was just a culmination of all those things coming together. And really, it took shape. Myron, you probably don't believe this, but it took shape in about 2.5, 3 weeks. And because it was really, but it was really 30 years in the making, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
And so it didn't just happen overnight. It was all these things that we've learned and just started to document. And I mean, my dad's written 3 books, Out of the Seats into the Streets, Beautiful Church. All of them have to do with the church impacting the world. And so this was, I would say, just another way of saying that. And hopefully a call. I've had the opportunity to meet with leadership teams and speak to, church leaders and pastors, and hopefully a call to say, man, God has given us everything we need. When crisis hits, and actually crisis is all around us, let's make sure that we're mobilizing our churches. Let's make sure we're being the hands and feet and being in the middle of that.
You know, one thing I respect, Josh, about Leadership Network and then our partnership with Exponential is platforming voices that are practitioners. And it's crazy because when I got out the penitentiary, and then when you got out of college, your dad for years would take us to Exponential, would take us and put us in places of position where we could be exposed to great leaders that would help grow our influence.
Yep.
And I know over the years, you know, you've even narrowed down on like who you are as a leader and what God has called you to do. And it's been dope to see the different avenues and venues for that. But what I find just like amazing is that I want our audience to capture is what are we doing with our influence? Because I'm hearing through the story and by firsthand experience that in crisis, the amount of influence you have or don't have will dictate how God even uses you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so what advice would you have for leaders who may say, you know what, like, yeah, we all were in crisis. The whole world was brought to their knees, but now it feels like things are getting back to normal and I'm not around crisis. What advice would you have for us? Because we've defined that crisis is not just danger, but it's opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do we need to do? Where would we start if we're getting back to normal? But we know that in some weird way, struggle, crisis, hard, messy, they actually birth something in us.
Yep. You got to find the crisis. I mean, you've got to find it. There's places in your city where crisis is happening. There are people in our churches who are in the middle of crisis. You've got to get next to them. I mean, we talk about the power of presence a lot. And how when you are proximate to challenge, when you are proximate to people's stories, God breaks your heart. And I even think when I think about innovation, you know, the idea is innovation for what? Man, innovation for impact. Innovation for the cause of seeing people experience the hope of Jesus. And I think we have to, like, when our foundation is really innovation for the purposes of Jesus.
Come on. Yeah.
It causes us to live with this sense of urgency. And I heard something recently from somebody, but they talked about Apple and why it was so successful. And they talked about the power of urgency. And I think when you're in the middle of crisis, you live with a sense of urgency. When I'm next to this 23-year-old girl, I'm sitting there saying, man, what can we do? Something's got to change. When I go to sleep at night and I hear gunshots, I'm like, my urgency and my prayer life goes way up. When I'm around people who are hopeless, my urgency goes up, and that urgency causes me to ask questions that lead to innovative answers and in the middle of the crisis. So I just think crisis provides an opportunity for us to stay urgent, to live urgent, which ultimately allows us to ask questions and come up with solutions to people's challenges.
I don't know what your next book, project is, but you just said some stuff, follow the urgent. And I feel like you've given us a roadmap. So, and definitely in the book, but it's like, where's, I'm just, reflecting back to you what I heard. Where's, if you're getting back to normal in your church, the first question to ask is where's the crisis?
Yep.
Where's crisis? But then like when we approximate ourselves towards crisis, we're then so close, the urgency level just rises.
Yep.
And if you're a church leader, you're a pastor, and the urgency quotient is low, that just simply means you're far from crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But
we should.
Come on, girl. Come on. Ride the wave, girl.
And like, as Christians in general, we should always be living with this sense of urgency, because Jesus always tells us we don't know the time nor the hour of when he'll be back. So our urgency should exist because we know that there's so many people dying, going to hell. You know what I mean? So we should always, you know, whether you live in the hood or you live in the nicest part of the country, you should always be living in crisis, like in urgency, knowing that Jesus could come back at any minute, and so much of the country, let alone the world, will die going to hell. So that alone should spur us into this sense of urgency. And another thing that I would say as well is, I think you said something earlier about the two important questions is, how can I help you and how can you help me? I think sometimes, especially like being a missionary in America, I spoke about this last week, a lot of the times a lot of Americans, but especially people on the outskirts of the inner city, they ask, how can I help you, more than they ask, how can you help me, as they don't see value in the inner city. But especially in a generation like this, where we are in crisis, is the time that you should be going to the inner cities and ask, how can you help me? Because you're so used to living in crisis, you're so used to living in urgency. What can I learn from you? So I think that's just a tip for anybody listening that is not used to a lifestyle of scarcity, or used to a lifestyle of where they don't know where the next crisis is around the corner. We're so used to it, we can help. you know?
Jade,
and that's why we need each other.
Right.
The suburban context needs the urban context. The urban context, we both have something where we need each other. I was thinking about this too when you guys were sharing. I think there's a reason why Jesus spent so much time with the unchurched, de-churched, and those that needed a church.
Man,
like that was the difference between Jesus and the religious leaders. I mean, he was with Zacchaeus. He hung out with all these sinners because that's what his business was about. And I think in church world, it's so easy to hang out with Christians. And to hang out with church people.
Yeah, I said this on my podcast before. I said, what's the point of being the salt of the world if you're not going to season anything? You know, why, if you're just going to stay in the salt jar with the rest of the salt, if you're just going to, you know, be the light.
We salt from one salt jar to the next salt jar.
That's a whole different take on salt. That's a whole different take on he throwing salt on my game. Josh, you brought something up. You know, Jade, you just gave a metaphor actually. That, and I've been talking in future shows. We're gonna talk about this, but you know, you just gave a metaphor for how we've been functioning as the church. That we've been salt in the jar. You know, instead of salt in somebody's food. You know, and it speaks to something you said earlier, Josh, that I want you to unpack because it was shocking. You said when COVID hit, virtually all the churches were closed. The doors were closed. And only those who were essential were allowed for their doors to even be open. How, man, where were you when you got that revelation? And how is God using that in your life?
Yeah, I mean, throughout COVID, again, we heard that message, and a lot of pastors and leaders, you know, felt like they were getting discriminated against because the doors of the church were closed. But the truth of the matter is, churches who were serving their communities, their doors were open. And not only were their doors were open, the community was grateful for it. The city was grateful for it. We actually received recognition from organizations and foundations in our city because of the way we were serving our community. And so I think, again, it was more of a revealer that, you know, we're called to serve our community. If our church were to leave, would our community, would our city miss us? COVID was a great opportunity to check that answer to that question. And I think for me, it just more revealed, it's like, man, the doors of the church should be open. Man. Like we are serving hope, but we're doing it in the form of serving needs. we're doing it in the form of finding out what our city needs and responding as quickly as we can. And so I feel like to some degree we miss the opportunity, but I think it can be a learning opportunity for many of us to say, when the next crisis hits, our church doors aren't going to be closed. And if our church doors aren't going to be closed, that means we've got to shift the way we're doing ministry. We've got to shift our resources. We've got to shift our leadership structure. We've got to shift our rhythms. We've got to change some things.
Oh my gosh. It's so interesting. On this metaphor thing. And I was with Josh earlier, and I hope I don't get canceled for saying this, but in COVID, speaking of crisis, in COVID, all of our weekend events were canceled, which meant that it sent the lot of pastors, I like to say a lot of event planners, into early retirement, right? Why? Because our paradigm of church was. Apple is talking to me back there, but our
was somebody canceling you?
I know our paradigm for church revolved around the event. Yeah. We found our identity in the event. We subscribed to the idea that church is an event. So when COVID hit, all those who have been discipled in event planning and those who showed up for the event, many didn't come back to the event because they found out that what they needed really wasn't sufficient enough to fulfill them, and their idea of worship was revolving around that. But let's, like, in our context, it was crazy because the mission never stopped.
Right.
Our event was canceled, but the kingdom turned up.
Right.
In a powerful way. And I know you guys were doing like things that like we were still in. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Things that, just because we know each other. And I want to highlight that for us today. It's like, hey, crisis is coming. And if it's not, we should find it, because it's going to help us realize and grow into this idea of becoming an essential church again.
Right. And I think too, like, the church was moving in this direction. Dave Gibbons, who's a friend of ours, like, he shared some stuff over the years. And I love when he makes statements like, justice is the new form of worship. And he talks about how in different seasons, there are different forms of worship. And for generations, we've heard that our generation, we want to make a difference. We want to get in the game. If the previous generation, I feel like one of the questions they were trying to ask is, how can I be happy? Our generation, we're trying to answer the question to a generation that's saying, how can I make a difference? And what does it look like to build my city and my community? And so I think they're in different seasons, different generations. I think COVID expedited that transition, that shift. And so even with our facilities, I think more churches were starting to ask the question, how can I use my facilities for more than just Sunday morning?
Right.
How can I use it to serve my community? I would say that, our churches and our facilities have to become more like distribution centers than just meeting spaces. And so they're more of the Amazon approach to how does my facility meet the needs of my church or meet the needs of my community? So one space for us on campus, we turned it into a remote learning center for kids that were in the community with internet access. How does it serve the community?
Wow.
But then number two, how do my spaces empower my people to love their neighbors better? And so even for us, food distribution, we view that as an opportunity with our lighthouses. As they're in their neighborhood, they can point their neighbors to a resource that gives them relational equity in the life of their neighbor.
So good.
And so we can use our facilities as these distribution centers where we're empowering people with tangible resources.
So one thing I just heard you in crisis, the question of how do we turn our assets, the church in America, we have so many, we are stinking rich. and to be able to look at our assets like a building and say, okay, let's convert our building into a distribution center.
Yep.
Let's turn our church into the Amazon.
Yep.
Where people can come and get whatever they need, and as they come get what they need, they get compassion.
Yep. Yep. And it's really empowering our people. I mean, I would say, just to break it up into three buckets. Number one, when I think about crisis and being innovative, it starts with our theology. And I think what was revealed is, are we preaching the whole gospel? Are we preaching, man, God wants to change me, but he also wants to use me to change the world? And so I think there's a theology focus, a gospel focus that's essential, that, in the middle of crisis, it reveals where our foundation of faith is. Wow. Number two is our discipleship process. Are we discipling people to love their neighbors well and to be in the middle of the crisis that our communities are facing? And then that last part, Myron, is on the strategic side of things. How are we strategically leveraging our resources, our facilities, our rhythms, our staff, to make sure that we're in our communities, loving our neighbors and in our city?
Wow.
Just a moment of silence. That's just all we need right now. Go ahead, Jade.
No, I was gonna say, wow, like that is amazing. And as Josh has mentioned, everybody that's listening, talking of resources, we want to remind people about your book, which is Church in Crisis, where you can find that on Amazon. And talk to us a little bit about your podcast. Is that a new thing as well that came out of COVID, or was he doing that before?
I think I started it maybe around a little before COVID, and it's called Influence to Impact. And again, my passion, my purpose and heart is to see people leverage their God-given influence for God-sized impact in the world. And so I get to sit down with athletes and business leaders and pastors and just talk about how they are uniquely positioned to impact their communities, their workplaces. And so I think that's the other thing about the church, is we have people in all these spheres of influence. And so it's not just about one lane of influence. The church has the capacity to engage the most diverse group in our communities. No other organization can engage people from every sphere of influence but the church. And so I think talking about that, highlighting it, hopefully it encourages others to use their influence and maybe gives them inspiration to think about how they can leverage what God has given them.
That's a very good point. I never thought of it like that before, but it's so true. It's powerful. So true. So true. So Myron, is it time for the lightning round?
It's time for the lightning round. Hey, we have a lightning round. We're working on getting some music for this lightning round, but we like to tip every. We like to get a little fun and silly at the end. But Jade, we have about 30 questions we want to ask you in this lightning round, and maybe we're only going to get through 3. So Jade, take it away.
Okay, so let's start off. As we was talking about all your resources, your book and so on, can you give us a book that every leader should be reading, or should have read, or should read in the future?
Every reader should. Every leader. If you're a leader, you're a reader. I mean, I like Dave Gibbons' book, Small Cloud Rising, I believe is what it's called. I think that's a powerful book, especially for church leaders.
Nice.
And Myron's book is another one. My dad's book, Out of the Seats into the Streets.
Thanks for the promo.
Thank you. What's your book called, Myron?
Myron's got like 5 books.
Yeah, just go to Amazon and just go to Myron Pearson. You'll see 10 of them.
Okay. No, you can write 10.
50% of them I just took Josh's content and repurposed it.
Go on, Myron, you got the next one.
Yeah, so Josh, and hopefully you say the right thing. Right now, what is your favorite song that you've been listening to maybe within the last 7 days?
My favorite song?
Yeah.
It's by my favorite artist,
Okay.
Myron Pierce.
Hey!
Hold on, how's that chorus go?
Even in a good time, in the bad.
God's got your back. You gotta know better days.
I tell you one artist I am listening to actually more, and Jade knows him personally, Stephen Malcolm. I've been listening to him a little bit, and the stuff that he's dropping, man, about the family tree, and it's just amazing. So y'all go check out Stephen Malcolm. Go check out Myron Pierce.
Along with you know, Common Hymnal. I like some of their stuff. Good Shepherd out of New York City. They got some cool stuff. Obviously Mav City, Gyra. That's my jam right there.
We had Jade on last week as I was interviewing them, and she and shout out to our friend Jennifer. She couldn't be here today, but Jade did a spoken word, man, that just lit the whole room on fire.
Come on. I gotta go back and get that one.
Yeah, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So
in my mind, I can do spoken word.
You probably can. The way that you're speaking today, I can imagine you be able to write a good piece. Absolutely.
My dream.
And what is your favorite food?
Right now, steak. Steak and mushrooms.
Follow the crisis.
I'm also a pizza guy too. I like pizza a lot.
You got anything else, Myron?
Or whatever my wife is cooking.
Yeah, nice. one thing he didn't is the brother liked to snack, but his brother don't gain a pound, so I'm still trying to figure that out, man.
I don't know about that.
Josh, man, this has been super dope. This conversation. Go ahead, Jay.
I think because we still have a little bit of time, right? I was going to ask you, Josh, is there anything that like is on your heart personally, or you feel like while you have an audience, you know, in my podcast, I do it with somebody called Mark the Bad Guy, and we have a section called Mark the Bad Guy's Bad News, where he just gets something off his chest. But is there anything that you feel like God has put on your heart that you feel like, you know what, the church needs to hear this. This is a frustration right now, because I feel like there should always be a space where, we talk about all the good stuff that's going on in the church and give advice to the church. But what is one thing, you know, we've spoken about what we need to start doing. What is something that currently we need to stop doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, one of the things that came to my mind off the bat is just the whole racial injustice side of things. And I'm super passionate about that. Get an opportunity to work with leaders and pastors. And I think number one, for me, it's been sad to see there was such a level of engagement. And then over the last year or so, there's been a huge level of disengagement. And for so many churches, this is what I hear is like, man, Josh, that's just one of 10 issues we're looking at. And part of it, you know, is probably from my own story and what I feel called to. But for me, it's like, that's one of the biggest issues in the US that has incredible history. And to treat it as if it was just a 4-year election, to treat it as if it was COVID coming and going, for me is one of the things that just frustrates me a lot. And I think the other thing is that conversation you know, when I work with business leaders, they talk about 3 areas of racial justice and injustice: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity is having a variety of people at the table and a diversity of perspectives. Equity is about providing opportunities for everybody and making sure that people are resourced and really empowered. And diversity, equity, inclusivity is all about making sure people aren't just at the table, but they have influence. And the thing I see over and over is churches want to be diverse. Man, it's the cool thing. It's the trendy thing. It's the hip thing. Like, man, I want diversity at the table because it's going to make me look good. But equity and inclusion require sacrifice. equity and inclusion require investment financially. It requires giving up your seat at the table. And I think when we went through some of the race stuff, one of the things that I saw, and I don't know if I'm going in the right direction or not, but I'm just sharing what's on my heart and on my chest.
Get it off your chest.
But, hey, let me just get it off my chest real quick. We had a lot of white pastors repent. And they repented for not being engaged, not being involved, and as I walked away, and even I would say even more as I look back, when we preach repentance, we talk about people who are heading in one direction and they make an intentional decision to go in the opposite direction.
Right.
We talk about a radical life change. And I feel like there was a lot of verbal repentance, but not as much follow-up and action taken in that direction. And I feel like it's just been lost in the conversation of politics, lost in the conversation of everything else that's going on in our world. And for me, I mean, the Bible says they'll know you by the love you have one for another.
Right.
And this picture of diversity is one of the most powerful pictures we have to give to the world. The fact that conversation, I feel like, has lost so much energy and steam over the last year. I feel like we're missing out on God's heart, and we're missing out on what could really be. So that's my woe. I mean, I love talking about that. I love working with organizations, churches, but I'm saddened just by how, and I have more empathy for the broader Black community that has been in the struggle for a long time. And they've experienced Martin Luther King's letters to from a Birmingham jail. I mean, the message he wrote in the 60s is the same message today. He said, I fear that the greatest stumbling block to justice isn't the Ku Klux Klan, isn't the politician, it's the white moderate who would rather have peace at the expense of real justice.
Wow.
And I just feel like that's every church leader needs to go read and study Letters from a Birmingham Jail by MLK, because I think that's the message for the church today.
Wow. That's a powerful point.
And I'll say this too. I'll say this. There are people and pastors that want to, but they don't know where to start. And I think the conversation can be so polarizing. And I think, I mean, I don't know, Jade, all of your story, but from what I know and have seen, Jade and Myron and guys like myself, I think we've had the opportunity to work with people on both sides. We've had experiences with people on both sides. Our heart is for solutions, not to point at the problems. There are people that can be a part of the solution, can be voices of reason that can really help bring clarity to this conversation. It's not about, man, people are prejudiced. My dad, a white guy from Iowa, my mom used to say he was prejudiced. Not because he was married to my mom. He loved my mom. But he was insensitive. And he had preferences, and those preferences caused him to live with a prejudice. And so I just know there are voices, there are people out there that would love to help you be a part of the solution. But man, let's not forget about it. Let's lean in. And I think it's one of the greatest witnesses we have for the world.
So powerful.
Amen. And I could sit and listen to you talk all day. And
all day.
I'm sure all of our
starting to pull out my passion a little bit. You pull out my passion.
No, it's good. we love to hear our guest passion. And if you are like me and you want to hear more from Josh, then make sure that you go and listen to his podcast, which is on all platforms. You can go to joshdotzler.com for his book, for his podcast, for his social media as well. And make sure, you go and get his book, Influence to Impact, which is the podcast, and Church in Crisis, and you can find that on Amazon.
I love it.
Hey, this has been fun, Josh. Man, it's like, this is just good, and it's good for my soul. It's good for the soul of our churches, organizations that we get to lead. And You know we're gonna have you back, man. I already know you're a household favorite on Church Next, man. We love you, bro. And to the Leadership Network family, just want to say thank you. If you're catching the replay right now or later, be sure that you tap in, share, and we'd love to hear from you. Josh would love to hear from you. Jade and I, Jennifer, we'd love to hear from you on how we can better serve you in this next season at Church Next. So thank you and enjoy your day.